I pressed my hand over my mouth so hard I could taste my own skin. The air inside the tent had grown heavy, stale, suffocating, but I didn't dare inhale. Outside, no more than 4 inches from my face, separated only by a thin layer of nylon, something was standing there. I heard dry pine needles slowly compress under the weight of a body. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It wasn't just passing by. It was circling the tent. Slowly. Methodically. Like someone studying a gift before tearing off the wrapping paper. A shadow fell across the slope of the tent, blocking out the moonlight. I saw the outline of a hand. Long, unnaturally thin fingers slid down the fabric, producing a sound like sandpaper dragged over canvas. The fingers stopped at the zipper. The metal pull tab gave a faint clink. The forest fell into absolute silence. No crickets. No wind. Only the sound of my heart slamming against my ribs, and slow, damp breathing from the other side of the fabric. The zipper began to move downward. Slowly. These are 3 stories about what truly hides in the deep wilderness. I've worked as a land surveyor for 8 years. My specialization is refining forest boundary lines for state registries. It's tedious work. You walk with a GPS receiver, a total station, and a backpack full of orange marking tape through places where no human foot has stepped in years. Most of the time, you're fighting mosquitoes and boredom. That Tuesday, in mid-October, I was assigned to mark a sector in northern Karelia. The plot was difficult: dense spruce forest, marshy soil, and no roads within a 20-kilometer radius. They dropped me off there by all-terrain vehicle and scheduled pickup in 3 days. Standard procedure. The first day passed normally. I set up camp, verified coordinates, established a base station. The strange part began the next morning, around 10. I was following my pre-planned route, marking trees with signal tape every 50 meters. Routine. You walk, check the instrument, tie a knot, move on. After about 2 kilometers deep into the forest, I came across a tree that was already marked. I stopped. The tape was bright orange, exactly like mine. But the knot was different. I tie a complex nautical knot, a habit from my time in the Navy. This one was a simple overhand knot, pulled so tight it bit into the bark. At first, I assumed it was old marking tape. Maybe someone had worked this area a year or 2 ago. I checked the map. No. This sector had been clean. No work done here since the 80s. I shrugged, cut off the other tape, tied my own, and moved on. 50 meters later, another strip. Same incorrect knot. Same height, just above eye level. A faint irritation crept in. Someone had been here before me and messed up the marking. That meant I'd have to double-check every meter so I wouldn't confuse my markers with theirs. I went another kilometer. The foreign tapes appeared with disturbing regularity. But there was something else. If my markers ran strictly north, following the sector boundary, these markers began to drift. At first by a couple of degrees. Then more. Out of curiosity, I decided to follow the other route for about 200 meters. The forest grew denser. The spruce trees stood so tightly packed that sunlight barely reached the ground. It was quiet. Too quiet for a daytime forest. After roughly 300 meters, I stepped into a small clearing. In the middle stood a birch tree. It was completely wrapped in orange tape. From bottom to top. Hundreds of meters of plastic had turned the tree into an orange cocoon. I approached slowly. This wasn't the work of a surveyor. It looked like obsession. I pulled out my knife to cut a piece of tape for closer inspection, and that's when I noticed something that made the inside of my chest go cold. Beneath the fresh, bright tape were older layers. Faded. Dirty. And beneath those, nearly decomposed strips. Someone had been coming back to this tree for years. Wrapping it. Again and again. I looked around. The forest stood like a wall. An irrational but overwhelming feeling hit me. I had stepped onto someone else's territory. I returned quickly to my own route, trying not to make noise. By evening, I was back at camp. I built a fire, ate, but the unease wouldn't fade. I sat by the flames reviewing GPS data. Then the screen flickered and went dark. The batteries were full. I inserted the spare set, nothing. The satellite phone showed searching for network, even though the signal had been strong that morning. Equipment fails. It happens. But all of it at once. I went to sleep with my hatchet beside me. My rest was fractured. I thought I heard footsteps. Not the heavy tread of an animal. Something lighter. Careful. A faint rustling. In the morning, I decided to pack up. Without navigation gear, working in that kind of wilderness was pointless. I dismantled the tent and headed toward the extraction point, navigating by compass. After about an hour of walking, I saw something orange ahead. My heart skipped. It was my tape. The one I had tied yesterday morning. With my nautical knot. I stepped closer. Yes. The same tree. I looked at the compass. The needle pointed north. I had been walking correctly. But if I was walking north, I should have been moving away from this place, not returning to it. I turned around and walked due south. 40 minutes later, I emerged into the same clearing. The compass was lying. Was someone, or something, creating a magnetic anomaly? Or was I losing my mind? I decided to follow the sun, ignoring the needle. The forest grew more impassable. Deadfall. Tangled brush. I forced my way through branches, scratching my face raw. Then I heard it. The sound of fabric tearing. I froze. It came from my left, about 30 meters away. I crouched behind a fallen trunk. Through the branches, I saw a figure. A man. He stood with his back to me. He wore a dirty gray-green jacket that blended with the forest. In his hands was a spool of orange tape. He approached a tree, tore off a strip with his teeth, and began tying it to a branch. But he wasn't tying a knot. He just wound it around and around, with nervous, jerking movements. Then he turned his head, not toward me, just sideways. I saw his profile. An old man. Very thin. Sunken cheeks. Long, tangled beard. But that wasn't the worst part. His eyes were covered with a thick strip of cloth. He was blind. Or at least, he shouldn't have been able to see. Yet he stepped confidently over a root, moved around a bush, and walked toward the next tree. He moved as if he knew the forest by heart. Every branch. Every hollow. He raised his head, as if sniffing the air, and slowly turned in my direction. The cloth over his eyes was dirty, dark stains where the eye sockets should have been. He opened his mouth and made a sound. Not a word. A click. A loud, sharp click of his tongue. Sock. From the thicket to my right came a responding click. Sock. Then from the left. Sock. There were many of them. They were surrounding me. Using echolocation, or some code of their own. The blind old man smiled, revealing black gums, and stepped directly toward my hiding place. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran harder than I ever have in my life. I didn't watch my footing. I crashed through brush, feeling branches slash my skin without pain. Behind me, the clicking grew louder. More frequent. Like a swarm of giant insects. I ran until I burst out onto a clearing where power lines cut through the forest. Metal towers. Civilization. I ran along the lines, gasping, blood pounding in my temples. I kept running for another hour until I collapsed from exhaustion. The ATV picked me up the next day, 5 kilometers from the designated extraction point. The driver asked what had happened to my face. It was scratched and bloody. I told him I'd encountered a bear. When we loaded my gear, I noticed something tied to the strap of my backpack. A strip of orange tape, tied with a simple overhand knot. I never felt when it happened. Maybe while I was sleeping that first night. Or maybe when I was running and thought branches were catching at my back. Someone had been close enough to touch me. And I hadn't felt it at all. After that incident, I took a leave of absence. I needed time to steady my nerves, and I couldn't think of anything better than agreeing to look after my uncle's house. The irony, right? Running from one forest only to hide in another. But this was different. It was a solid 2-story cottage in a gated community, surrounded by a tall fence. The nearest neighbors were about 200 meters away, not exactly crowded, but not complete wilderness either. My uncle had gone on a month-long business trip and asked me to stay there, feed the dogs, 2 massive alibis, and keep an eye on the heating system. The first 2 weeks were perfect. During the day, I walked the dogs. In the evenings, I read by the fireplace. The house was packed with electronics, motion sensors, perimeter cameras, a full smart home system. I felt completely safe. Everything changed on Thursday evening. A heavy snowstorm rolled in. Within a couple of hours, the yard was buried knee-deep. I was sitting in the living room watching a movie when a notification popped up on my phone from the security system, motion detected. Camera 3, backyard. I opened the app. The screen showed nothing but a blizzard. Snow fell in a solid white wall, and the camera kept trying to focus on large snowflakes drifting past the lens. I decided it was a false alarm and turned off the notifications. 10 minutes later, the dogs, who had been sleeping in the hallway, lifted their heads at the exact same moment. They didn't bark. They let out a low, guttural growl. The fur along their shoulders stood on end. Alibis are serious animals. They fear no one. But now they were backing away from the front door. I walked to the window. Through the curtain of snow, I could see nothing, only blurred halos of light from the lamps mounted on the fence posts. Suddenly, the light on one of the posts went out. Then the next. Darkness advanced toward the house, slow and deliberate. I went to the kitchen to check the breaker panel, thinking the snow had damaged the line. But inside, the lights were steady. Only the outdoor lighting was dying. Someone, or something, was switching off the lamps. The switches were inside the garage. I returned to the dogs. They had wedged themselves under the staircase and were whining. That frightened me most of all. These dogs had torn apart wolves. Now they were hiding like puppies. I opened the camera app again. Camera 1, gate, black screen. Camera 2, garage, black screen. Camera 3, backyard, still working. In the middle of the snow-covered yard stood a snowman. An ordinary, crooked snowman. The problem was, 20 minutes earlier it hadn't been there. Someone had built it in the time it took me to walk to the kitchen and back. I zoomed in. The snowman faced the camera. Instead of eyes, it had 2 dark holes pressed into its head. But something about its shape was wrong. It was too anatomical. It had shoulders. I stared at the screen, trying to decide if this was some kind of prank by neighborhood kids. Then the snowman turned its head. It didn't crumble. Snow didn't fall from it. It turned its head smoothly, like a living person. It wasn't a snowman. It was a person, covered from head to toe in snow. Or in something white that mimicked snow. It stood perfectly still, blending into the landscape, and waited. I rushed to the door and checked the locks. Everything was secured. I called the police. Due to weather conditions, response time is extended. All patrol units are handling traffic accidents. There's someone in my yard. I shouted into the phone. Lock yourself inside and wait, the dispatcher replied indifferently. I grabbed the fireplace poker and returned to my phone. Camera 3 now showed an empty yard. The snowman was gone. But there were footprints in the snow. They did not lead from the fence toward the house. They led from the blind spot beneath the house to the glass door of the veranda. I heard a soft knock. Not on the door. On the glass upstairs. I lifted my head. In the attic window, against the black sky, there was a face. It was white. Completely white, like a mask. It was pressed flat against the glass, nose and lips distorted against the surface. The eyes stared directly at me, down through the stairwell. I froze, paralyzed with horror. How had it climbed the sheer second-floor wall? No ladder. Slick siding covered in ice. The figure tapped a finger against the glass. Knock. 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 Playful. Inviting. Then the lights in the house went out. I was left in total darkness, with 2 whining dogs and a poker in my hand. I heard the upstairs window open. The click of the latch. The groan of the frame. It was climbing inside. I didn't try to play hero. I dove into the basement, the door tucked beneath the staircase, and slid the bolt into place. I sat there in the damp darkness, among jars of pickles, and listened. Footsteps echoed above. Heavy, wet slaps of bare feet on hardwood. It descended to the first floor. I could hear it moving through the living room. Pausing. Touching things. Dishes clinked in the kitchen. Water rushed from the faucet. Was it drinking? Then the footsteps approached the basement door. Silence. I stopped breathing. The handle turned slowly. The bolt held. The handle jerked harder. Once. Twice. Then silence again. And from behind the door came a voice. My voice. Hello? Police? There's someone in my yard. It was a recording of my call from 5 minutes earlier. It had replayed it. Then my voice laughed. A dry, crackling laugh that rose into a shriek. I stayed in the basement until morning. The police arrived only at dawn. They found the broken attic window. Wet footprints throughout the house. But the worst thing they found was in the living room. On the couch where I had been sitting, every cushion had been neatly slit open, and the stuffing had been arranged on the floor in a perfect circle. In the center of the circle lay my phone. I opened the gallery. There was a video recorded that night. Darkness. The sound of my heavy breathing in the basement. The camera filming the crack beneath the basement door, from the outside. Then the camera lowers, almost to the floor. And through the crack, my eye is visible. I was staring through it, trying to see if it had gone away. And it was filming me from the other side. It knew I was there. It could have kicked in that flimsy door in a second. But it just stood there, filming my terrified eye and listening to me tremble. It was enough for it to know that I was afraid. I often ask myself, why do we go into the forest? We look for silence, for unity with nature. But we forget that nature isn't just beautiful trees and birdsong. It's a system. A cruel, ancient food chain in which we stopped being the apex predator a long time ago. The third story happened last summer. A friend of mine, I'll call him Alex, and I decided to hike a difficult route in the Appalachians. We were experienced backpackers, well-equipped, confident. Our goal was to find an abandoned mine that wasn't marked on official maps but had been mentioned on urban exploration forums. We left the main trail around noon. The forest changed immediately. The path vanished, the undergrowth grew thick and thorny. We followed a GPS track downloaded from the internet. By 4 in the afternoon, we began to notice something strange. The forest had become unnervingly uniform. The trees stood in perfectly straight rows, as if someone had planted them. But these were century-old pines. "Look," Alex said, pointing at the ground. A tree lay across our path. A massive trunk, covered in moss. But it had a cut in it, a perfectly straight, rectangular opening, like a doorway carved through the wood. We stepped through it. The mood shifted. The air grew colder. There was a smell of stagnant water and rot. At 6 in the evening, we found the mine. It was just a hole in the rock face, half collapsed and choked with stones. But in front of the entrance stood a tent. Old. Sun-bleached. A Soviet-style canvas tent. "Hey!" Alex called out. "Anyone there?" Silence. We approached. The tent was zipped shut. Alex pulled the flap open. It was empty inside. No sleeping bag. No belongings. The floor, however, was covered in a thick layer of bird feathers. Thousands of them. And in the center lay a child's doll. Plastic. Filthy. Missing one eye. "Let's get out of here," I said. A cold unease crept over me. It looked like some kind of installation. Something staged by a maniac. We decided not to camp near the mine and to move at least a kilometer back. We walked quickly, constantly glancing over our shoulders. The sun sank lower. Shadows stretched long, twisting into distorted shapes. When darkness fell completely, we pitched our tent on a small rise. We built a fire, but it burned poorly, smoking heavily. We lay down to sleep without undressing. Alex placed his hunting knife beside him. I woke to the feeling of Alex gripping my hand. "Shoo," he whispered. His eyes were wide open. Someone was walking outside. The footsteps were quiet, but heavy. Bipedal. This brings us back to where I began. I lay in my sleeping bag with my hand clamped over my mouth. Alex lay beside me, pale as death. A shadow fell across the tent wall. A hand with long fingers. The sound of the zipper. The zip slid all the way down. The tent flaps slowly parted. I expected to see a monster. A deformity. A bear. But there was no one there. Only the night forest and moonlight. I blinked. A second earlier, I had seen the shadow of a hand. I had heard breathing. No one. Alex exhaled. He pushed himself up on his elbows to look outside. "Don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. Alex stuck his head out of the tent. In that same instant, something yanked him out. No sound. No scream. Just whoosh, and he was gone. Only his legs flashed briefly in the opening. And then silence. I was alone in the open tent. "Alex?" I whispered. From the darkness, about 10 meters away, came Alex's voice. Calm. Even. "Come here. It's safe. I found the way." But the voice came from above. About 5 meters up, from a tree. "Alex? Come here," the voice repeated. The exact same intonation. Absolutely identical. Like a recording. I understood then that it wasn't Alex. I grabbed the knife, slashed open the back wall of the tent, and tumbled into the bushes on the other side. I crawled. I didn't stand up. I crawled on my stomach, pressing myself into the moss, trying to become part of the earth. Above me, in the canopy, something moved. Leaping from branch to branch, following me. And from overhead, Alex's voice kept calling. "Why aren't you coming? It's warm here. There's water. Come here." Then another voice joined it, my mother's. "Son, stop playing and come home. Then the dispatcher from the second story. Lock yourself inside and wait. It was reading my memory. Or replaying what it had heard from other victims. I crawled all night. My knees and elbows were torn raw. When dawn began to break, the voices stopped. I reached a road around noon. The police searched the forest. They found our tent. It had been ripped to shreds. They never found Alex. But they found his backpack. It was hanging from the top of the tallest pine in the area, 30 meters above the ground. Inside the backpack were only bird feathers. And the same doll from the mine. Since then, I don't go into forests. I don't even go to parks. Because sometimes, at night, when I open the window to air out my apartment on the 10th floor, I hear a familiar click from the darkness below. Click. And Alex's quiet voice. I found you. Come outside. You think walls protect you? You think the city is a fortress? They were here before us. The forest was here before the cities. And they know how to wait. If you ever hear the voice of someone you love calling you from the dark, don't answer. And for the love of God, don't look out the window. It might already be there. Pressed against the glass. Watching you with its white, empty eyes.